And joining us now to discuss this is Péter Balázs, former European Commissioner and Hungarian Foreign Minister. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So let me begin by asking a question which some other people, especially those who do not follow politics on a day-to-day basis, may be asking themselves. Why did this visit only occur now, 2 years into the war?
Well, it was the very tough line of Mr. Orban since the beginning of the Russian aggression in Ukraine that he mostly supported the Russian rhetorics and the Russian arguments and didn't find the time to visit Kyiv. I think he was the only head of government within the European Union who did not come to Kyiv. And as a pretext, mostly he argued with some problems of the small Hungarian minority in Ukraine, in the Subcarpathian region. Well, partly this was true, and this is an important issue in itself, but it was an artificial connection to bind it to his relations with Ukraine. Now, well, he had perhaps two motivations. One is holding the Council presidency in the EU from the 1st of July. And the second one, that he tried to approach some political families in the European Parliament on the extreme right. And he was refused. Namely, he was refused by European conservatives and reformists, by Mrs. Meloni. And the main reason was his policy with Ukraine and his close relationship with Russia.
Now, I wonder, because according now to recent statements, we do know that the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán also asked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to consider a ceasefire in order to speed up the talks. So what was the primary motivation, to your mind, behind Orbán's proposal for a ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, the question is that who has mandated Mr. Orbán from our alliance system, either from the EU or from NATO, to make such a proposal? This is a very serious issue, a ceasefire in the middle of a war, which has been there for more than 2 years now. A ceasefire has some preconditions and some follow-up steps. So I think it was his own initiative without any prior consultation with our allies. And this is in line with his general propaganda, speaking about peace and peace and peace, and not taking into account the very serious circumstances, because a peace talk or a ceasefire has there's some preconditions, and it was just an improvisation, in my opinion, to launch this idea again. His EP campaign was full with peace slogans without a deeper analysis.
Now, this peace proposal, if we can even call it as such, seems to align closely with statements that are made by the followers of potential future president of the United States, Donald Trump, running for presidency against Joe Biden. Do you think this is a part of a broader strategy, that Viktor Orbán is counting on Trump to win the elections and later on to have this sort of synchronized approach to Ukraine provide benefits for himself should the Trump-Orbán alliance actually come into fruition, so to say?
I think this is very much so, because Orban is not hiding his strong support to Donald Trump, which provokes some tensions in the bilateral relations between Hungary and the United States, the actual president, Joe Biden. Orban visited Donald Trump in his ranch at a private happening, and in a general way, it's very characteristic for the foreign policy of Mr. Orbán, not dealing with states and actual governments, but much more with political parties and with politicians in person. So Donald Trump is his friend. Before the change in Brazil, President Bolsonaro was his close friend, and so on. So he is selecting his relations on the basis of party politics and not on the basis of the motivations and interests of states.
And now looking at the situation from the lens of the fact that Hungary has now taken the presidency within the EU, now some say that this proposal might be seen as an attempt by Orban to position himself as a peace broker, which might enhance Hungary's influence within the EU and globally. However, now I wonder, because this proposal might in fact cause friction within the EU, where member states support a more hardline approach against Russian aggression, and Orban's stance could effectively be perceived as undermining EU solidarity on the issue. So I know that you don't have a crystal ball and you don't have a way to see what Orban was really thinking, but if you could speculate, what do you think he had in mind when proposing that?
Well, I think he has to change to some extent his political line in the role of the presidency in the next 6 months, because in fact he was the one who vetoed several actions against Russia. At the same time, I have to add that he approved all the sanction packages in the EU, but prevented economic help to Ukraine, delivering weapons to Ukraine, starting accession talks with Ukraine, and so on. So the maximum what could be achieved under the pressure of the most member states in the EU was a so-called constructive abstention, so leaving the room, going out for a coffee when the others voted, for instance, the start of accession talks with Ukraine. Now he is in a new position, and I think his rapid visit to Kyiv was the first step in order to change a little bit his very hard line opposing common actions in favor of Kyiv.
And speaking of the presidency, do you think that, as some commentators are suggesting, the restructuring of the European Union, which had taken place during the last couple of years, could make the question of the presidency superficial to some extent, i.e. even if Orban wanted to undermine certain policies, he might not be able to do that?
Well, in fact, since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, two very important roles have been substituted by permanent persons. There is a permanent person chairing the European Council, so the heads of government, and a permanent person chairing the Council of the Foreign Ministers. So neither Mr. Orbán nor his foreign minister, Péter Balázs, will have a role to play. They will sit in the circle of their colleagues. At the same time, the two other institutions, Parliament and Commission, have distanced themselves from the Council led or chaired by Hungary, because in a very exceptional way, the European Commission does not come to Budapest for the usual visit at the beginning of each semester to contact the government. And the European Parliament could not find a date for the usual speech of the Prime Minister of the presidency. So Orban will not hold a speech in the month of July before the newly elected European Parliament. It will be postponed to some later date, which is not the same as presenting a program of priorities at the very beginning. So there are some tensions already between the Council chaired by Orbán and the two other institutions.
Péter Balázs was our guest today. Thank you so much for joining us and providing your expert insights.
Thank you.
And now it's time for a short break, and after that, we'll be taking a glance at the latest news from the world of culture. So please do stay with us.